Welcome to the deep dive. We're plunging right into something complex today, something that really matters. It's this often unspoken struggle where faith and mental well-being intersect. Maybe you felt it yourself. That, tension between looking for spiritual answers while also dealing with really heavy things like anxiety or depression, that silent battle. That's where we're going today.
Yeah, and our mission really is to unpack how Christian communities can start to address and hopefully overcome the stigma that's frankly deeply rooted around mental health. We've gone through the source material you sent, articles, notes, all of it. And we're aiming to pull out the key insights, how to move from perhaps judgment towards real healing in these faith contexts.
Right. And by the end of this deep dive, what you'll get is hopefully a much clearer picture of why the stigma sticks around. Plus, we'll uncover some actually quite surprising biblical ideas that might shift your perspective. And importantly, some practical steps, ways to build more supportive healing environments without it feeling overwhelming. It's not just info, it's about maybe some transformation, clarity. So let's paint the picture first, this silent struggle in the pew. You see people in church, maybe they're smiling, singing, but inside, they could be fighting huge battles, anxiety, depression, other challenges. It's often this very private thing, isn't it, hidden away?
It really is. And the sources, they really shine a light on why this silence, this shame, is so common in Christian circles. A few key things pop out. First, there's just this powerful fear of judgment, a real worry that if you admit you're struggling, people will think you're, less faithful, broken.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Who wants to be seen as, not spiritually strong enough?
Exactly. And tied to that is a pretty significant misuse of Scripture sometimes. You hear this harmful idea, right, that if you have a mental illness, you just need more faith, as if, serious doubt or deep sadness is automatically a spiritual failure instead of, part of being human or even a medical issue. And then there's this ingrained church culture perfection kind of subtly pushes everyone to seem like they've got it all together, always fine, which makes being truly vulnerable incredibly difficult.
And it's tough when communities, even with good intentions, kind of get it wrong.
Yeah.
The sources mention this thing called spiritual bypassing, where someone's told, just pray it away or trust God more, but there's no real listening, no genuine empathy beyond maybe a quick dismissive phrase.
And that approach, instead of comforting, it just deepens the isolation and the shame for the person struggling. We saw this so clearly in that story from the source material about Sarah. She was deeply faithful, but battling severe depression for years, just crippling. When she finally worked up the nerve to tell a leader, someone she trusted, the response was basically, confess your sin, have more faith. So instead of finding comfort or understanding, she just felt more shame, like her illness was her fault, a moral failing. And eventually that feeling, that judgment, it got so heavy she just stopped going to church. That's the real devastating impact we're talking about here.
Wow, that story, it really brings home the human cost, doesn't it? Makes you think how many people might be feeling that way right now in our own communities. Okay, so if struggling isn't about weak faith and praying it away can actually cause harm, then what does the Bible actually say when we look at the scriptures themselves? Because I think, honestly, a lot of people are genuinely confused on this point.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting, maybe even surprising for some. The Bible itself. It offers a radically different view, much more compassionate than some of these cultural norms suggest. Take James 5, verse 16. It says, confess your sins to one another. Pray for each other so that you may be healed. Now think about that. In a culture that often tells us, hide your problems, look perfect, the Bible is actually commanding us to share our struggles. It sees that vulnerability, that community honesty, as a path towards healing, bringing things into the light together, not burying them alone.
That's a really powerful counter-narrative, isn't it? Totally flips that perfection idea.
Absolutely. And then you've got Galatians 6.2. It just plainly says, carry each other's burdens. This isn't just like sharing a quick prayer request. It's a deep call to share the load. Shared responsibility. It means actually getting involved, walking alongside someone in their struggle, not just telling them to buck up and handle it. And Romans 12.1 theme, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. That's not just a nice suggestion, it's a mandate, really, to make space for all of it. The grief, the pain, the suffering, right there alongside the joy. It means acknowledging the whole spectrum of human experience within the community.
And thinking about these scriptures, it connects so clearly to how Jesus himself interacted with people who were hurting, who were seen as broken. How did his approach kind of embody this radical compassion?
Oh, absolutely. He was the ultimate model of engaging with vulnerability, not shying away from it. The sources remind us of examples, right? The woman at the well, an outcast, carrying so much shame. Or the man at the pool of Bethesda, disabled for 38 years, probably feeling hopeless. And in both cases, Jesus didn't just, offer a quick fix or a religious platitude. No, he engaged with their humanity. He listened. He saw their distress. He met them right where they were. And the healing he offered was holistic. It wasn't just spiritual. It touched their physical and emotional pain, too. The core idea really is that spiritual maturity isn't about hiding weakness. It's about embracing it. It means showing up as our real, imperfect selves, trusting that grace is enough.
Okay, so let's unpack this more. This is where it gets really practical, I think. What does a spiritually safe church actually look like? What are the concrete things a community can do to become that place of healing?
Well, a truly safe church, it kind of shifts its whole mindset. First off, they make listening a priority. Listening before preaching or giving advice, creating spaces where people genuinely feel heard. Without that immediate judgment jumping in, they actively create space for real talk, maybe through small groups focused on sharing struggles, or just by talking openly about mental wellness from the pulpit. And crucially, they work to normalize counseling and accountability, framing them as part of overall health, seeing professional help not as a lack of faith, but as, well, wisdom, courage even.
Yeah, that normalization piece feels huge for breaking down the shame. It makes me think of that internal battle. Shame tells me I'm bad. Grace reminds me you're still loved. Compassion seems key to breaking that cycle.
It's absolutely central. And the sources give concrete examples of how churches foster these healing environments.
Yeah.
Things like starting specific mental health ministries or maybe training prayer teams and empathy. So not just people who will pray for you from afar, but people equipped to listen deeply, offer that compassionate presence, maybe even know some basic mental health first aid.
Hmm.
There was a really powerful story in the source material about a church. They started simple, peer-led support groups for anxiety, depression, and they saw amazing transformation, not just for the individuals, but it shifted the whole church culture. They also really encouraged churches to invite professionals to speak, Christian therapists, counselors. It bridges that gap, showing faith and clinical care can work together. They're not opposing forces.
What's really interesting here, and quite empowering actually, is that you don't necessarily have to wait for some big church-wide program to start.
That's exactly right. There's a real call to action here for you listening right now. You can actually start the change right where you are. In your small group, your church friendships, even your family. It could mean learning to pray with people, not just for them.
Mm.
Being truly present, hearing their pain, offering active support in that moment rather than just a quick, I'll pray for you from a distance. And it also means being willing to model vulnerability yourself sometimes, sharing your own struggles appropriately, inviting others into that space. The source also had that reflective question, almost like a journal prompt, for you to consider privately. Lord, where has I been hurting in silence?
Mm.
It's an invitation, really, to bring your own hidden stuff into the light, maybe just between you and God first, as a starting point for healing.
So wrapping this up, the core takeaway from this deep dive feels really clear. True healing, it starts with honesty, with bringing the hidden things out, and with shared vulnerability in a community that practices compassion, this journey out of silence. It's not meant to be walked alone, it's collective. It asks us to lean into grace together.
Mhm. And building on that, if we really truly believe that God's grace covers all our weaknesses, every single one, then maybe the provocative thought is, what other walls that we'd be called to break down in our own lives or in our communities beyond mental health? What other hidden struggles? What other areas of shame might be waiting for that same liberating power, vulnerability, and community support? Something to think about.
Remember that central message from the material today. Healing begins with honesty. You are safe here. Thank you so much for joining us on this step dive.